Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. On today's episode, I am thrilled to welcome Austin Kleon, New York Times bestselling author. He was the keynote at our last Art Ed Now conference, and he's got a new book out called Don't Call It Art, and I am really looking forward to talking with him about it today. Now, if you are not familiar with Austin from our Art Ed Now conference, you probably know him from Steal Like an Artist, his manifesto for creativity that really just sparked a whole series of books exploring what it means to be a creative person in the world today. And he's written a series of three books. There was Steal Like an Artist, and then Show Your Work, which is kind of a guide to sharing your creativity, getting your work noticed. And he also wrote Keep Going, which was a wonderful guide for staying creative, even in chaotic times. And I think my favorite description of him came from an Atlantic article I read that called him positively one of the most interesting people on the internet. And Austin does all sorts of great things online, including his weekly newsletter. And now, after quite a few years, he's back with his brand new book. It's called Don't Call It Art, 10 Ways to Create Like a Kid Again. And for this book, he was inspired by just sort of being a parent, or I think he called it being a studio assistant to his two boys. It is about creativity for ourselves, but it all goes back to the idea that that artist, that fearless artist that we have inside of all of us, okay, that never really disappeared. And as adults, we just need to give that young artist permission to come back out. And so I want to talk to Austin today about unlocking that creativity, how we can play, how we can make art, how we can be more creative. And I want to ask him about the book. I loved reading it, absolutely loved it. And I think just the idea of how we as adults, as artists, can stay genuinely curious about the things that kids love and the things that kids are interested in, and how we can use that as inspiration for our own creative practice. And there's a lot to dive into, a lot to talk about, and Austin is here, so let me bring him on now. Austin Kleon is joining me now. Austin, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Hey Tim, I'm well. I'm happy to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. For those of you unfamiliar, which I think is very few people, I would love for you, Austin, to give us a quick introduction to, who you are and what you do, and most importantly, tell us about your new book that was just released last week.
Um okay, so I call myself a writer who draws. I make art with words and books with pictures. And I am best known for this book called Steal Like an Artist, which came out like 14 years
I was
ago.
going to say a while ago.
And it kind of led to this whole series of books about how to be more creative in the digital age. So I have a book called Show Your Work. I have a book called Keep Going. And then I have a new book in the series that's coming out now, which is called Don't Call It Art. And my other books were written for, I don't know, the other books had the last book of mine had a little bit of my kids' work in it. But this is a book that's completely inspired by me being around my kids when they were about 4 or 5. I think that 4-year-olds are natural artists, natural scientists, natural creative people.
Right.
And getting to be around two of them kind of gave me a good kick in the pants when I needed it. And so I wanted to bottle that sensation and that energy of being around them when they were that age. And so that's what the book is supposed to do for the reader. It's kind of like how can we give ourselves the love and care that the creative kid inside of us needs so they can come out and play, basically.
Yeah, I love that. And I, just finished reading it. Loved it, by the way. And
Thank you.
as I was saying there's so many lessons I think that we can draw from that, so much inspiration I took from it. And I guess one of the big things I wanted to ask you about, one of your chapters is about giving yourself time and space and materials. And just the idea that, we inherently have that creative play inside of us. If we can go back to our 4-year-old selves and kind of tap into that, but we also need to give ourselves time to do that, space to do that, and give ourselves the materials as well. So can you just talk a little bit more about those things and why they're so important for us to tap into our creativity?
I think they form a kind of algebraic equation. And oh no, we're on art. We're talking about art, but like, I think there's a kind of math equation at work where it's time plus space plus materials equals play, which is the work of the kid and the work of the artist. Trouble begins when one of those elements is taken away or it's reduced somehow.
Yeah.
So if you have space and you have materials, but you don't make any time to go there, you're in trouble.
Hmm.
If you have time and you have materials, but you have nowhere to work, well, that's difficult,
Yeah.
right? And if you have space and time, but nothing, no materials, you don't have anything to play with. So I think a lot of times when we're kind of bottomed out with our work, one of the things we can do is kind of run ourselves through that equation and ask yourself, do I have the right amount of these things?
Hmm.
And material, when I'm talking about materials, those are like toys. Those are like our pen and paper, that's
Yeah.
scissors and magazines, that's whatever, paint and canvas, whatever it is that we use to do our stuff. But it can also be like material in the sense of like a comedian or a writer gathering material, like the stuff of life. And so yeah, I think that this just is an equation. Like if you're having trouble in your work, I think there's a way to kind of do an audit where you're kind of like, am I giving myself enough time? Am I giving myself enough space? And do I have some fun materials? And I think fun is really a really important thing with materials, because materials don't have to be fancy, they don't have to be like really high end, but what they do need to do is they need to speak to us in some
Mm.
ways. This is something that I think a lot of people misunderstand about doing creative work, is that sometimes the material tells us what it wants to be. And I
Right.
think that, textile artists, potters, people who really work with physical materials know this, that, cardboard wants to do something different than clay,
Hmm.
and, wool wants to do something different than silk, that kind of thing. But I think we can learn from those tactile artists, even in terms of writing. Some people, so I think that was what I really learned with my kids, is that you kind of have to have all those elements together.
Right. Right. And another thing that I wanted to ask you about, just kind of along with materials, but also moving past that too, is just, when we're working with different things, we want to do things in the right way or use the materials in the right way.
Yeah.
And another thing you talk about in the book is, when you're 4, you don't worry about making things perfect. You don't worry about,
Mm-mm.
and eventually as we get older and as art teachers, we see this all the time in our kids, that kids feel like things need to be perfect or they at least need to be right. And I'm just curious about what advice you have either for teachers who are creating their own art or teachers who are working with students about getting past perfectionism and
Yeah.
getting past that fear of making mistakes.
Well, I think one thing to do is to focus on quantity instead of quality.
Yeah.
There's a parable in the book Art and Fear that I love. It's about a pottery class, and the
Yes.
teacher comes in and says, "Hey, half of the class is going to be graded on how many pots you make. And the other part of the class is going to be graded on the perfect like specimen." And as the parable goes, is that all the best pots were thrown by the people who were in the quantity, the ones that were making a bunch of pots
Right.
versus the one that were trying to get the perfect one. So I think working in volume is really it can be a great thing. Instead of like, come to me with one poem, tomorrow, bring me 10 poems that you made in 5 minutes. And then
Hmm.
maybe we can tear those apart and make a whole poem out of it, that kind of thing. Like in the studio here, I get myself in that mindset because I love printmaking.
Oh, yeah.
And so printmaking is a great way to just like, let's make a bunch of the same image. Let's not worry about whether we get the perfect pull. Let's just be fast and quick, and then let's see what mistakes we make that we can actually use later. Because one of the things I've learned from printmaking is it's usually when I'm trying to use up the last of my ink, and then maybe I'm printing on, like, maybe I run out of paper and I'm like trying to find some weird material. That's when something happens where I discover something that I should have known when I first set out. So I think like focusing on quantity versus quality, making a lot of work and using time constraints in particular. I think time is like
Mm,
a really
yeah.
interesting constraint, is to say, hey, make as many things as you can in 10 minutes, and then you don't have time to worry about
Right. I like that a lot.
it.
And I think those constraints can be really helpful because then, yeah, you're not able to focus on, making everything perfect. You're way more focused on, oh, I have 15 minutes left. I got to get this done. I think that's a good
Yeah.
mindset shift.
I think another thing I learned from my kids is how much they like to like pass. At one point, they were kind of drawing together, or we would draw together, and we learned that if I we would kind of have like a factory system going, and a certain, like, I think collaboration is a good way to get out of your perfectionist zone too, is to
Yeah.
just be like, hey, we've got 5 minutes, you need to do this piece, and then you're going to turn and give your piece to the person next to you, and they're going to add the next color, that kind of thing, bringing in collaboration, using time constraints, that kind of thing, just so the individual doesn't feel like it's all on them to come up with this like perfect, beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. I'm just thinking about how that applies to the classroom and like all the different ways that we can do that. And so I think that's definitely something that
Yeah.
teachers can run with.
Someone who's a big hero of mine is Linda Berry, and anyone
Hmm.
who is listening, if you're not aware of Linda's work, I think the stuff that Linda does in the classroom was really, really influential on me when in my own studio, but also with my kids. I do a lot of the same drawing exercises and stuff like that. So like one of my favorite things to do personally as a drawer is I love doing blind contour drawings.
Yeah.
So I love to draw without looking at the paper. That's one way that I get out of my imperfectionist zone. I actually do that. I was just at a music show the other night, and I was doing blind drawings because I get bored after a while in an event. But it's something that really gets you out of your, like, out of that perfectionist mode. And I think when you learn, so much is about tricking yourself and your body into learning what it feels like to be free and to make
Mhm.
a mark that is true and honest. When you're really like, especially with drawing, there's a thing where you can kind of tell when you're faking a drawing, when you're not really looking, when you're not really
Yeah.
laying down the right line. It happens in writing too. When you put down a sentence, you're like, I don't really believe that
Yeah.
sentence. This isn't really coming out. And so I think probably if for the people who are listening, all art forms kind of mix together in my head, and that's one
Mhm.
reason I like to do a lot of different things, is that I find that one form talks to the other. And so I think another thing that would be really helpful in schools is to do cross. I know this is hard to coordinate, but to do cross disciplinary type
Right.
stuff, to bring writing class into art class, bring art class into writing class, and vice versa.
No, I think those are great ideas. And yeah, there's definitely challenges, but that's something that teachers have been doing or trying to do for a long time. So
Yeah.
I think the framework is there. Another thing that I was reading and wanted to ask you about was the idea as far as your creative output. If you're struggling, if you're not creating, not coming up with ideas, say that the lack of output is likely a lack of input. And you're
Mm.
just talking about how we need to be reading, consuming, just interacting with other ideas. So can you talk about the importance of that, but also maybe give some advice on where you find inspiration or where people can look for inspiration?
Yeah, so, this is really what the Steal Like an Artist book was about, and I tried to, like,
Hmm.
the interesting thing about the kids is they did everything I wrote about in Steal Like an Artist, like, naturally. I didn't have to, like, teach them
Yeah.
about it. So that was what was so weird, is my kids would look at something and they would immediately be like, I want to copy that thing. So
Yeah.
they would, like, watch SpongeBob, and then they'd want to draw SpongeBob, and then they
Right.
would, like, just draw SpongeBob a million times, and then they were like, what if we draw ourselves as SpongeBob? Okay, cool. Like, now we're characters, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, what if we did our own version of SpongeBob? And suddenly it was like a parody of SpongeBob. And then eventually they, like, kind of came up with their own thing. So they just kind of, like, did this naturally. Like, I
Yeah.
think kids are natural copy machines. And so what they kind of taught me is that this is the natural progression of things. You
Hmm.
fall in love with something that you just, like, can't get enough of, and then you want to copy it yourself because you want to, like, learn how it works and, like, what it is, and, like, and then it's not enough. You're like, I want to go further. And so I think it almost goes from, like, copying to parody to discovering your own thing.
Yeah.
I actually think in the education, in the classroom, I think that copying and parodying could be used to a tremendous advantage. I mean, we've a lot of times in school we talk about copying as bad and, like,
Right.
plagiarism and that kind of thing, but if you really think about the way that people used to be taught, especially with art, is like you would learn how to paint by copying, like, old
Oh,
masters
yeah.
and
That's
old
part of the
drawings and
classical
stuff.
training, take
Yeah,
your canvas to the
exactly.
museum and
So,
yeah.
but what was just so interesting to me is that my kids did that without me teaching them how to do
Hmm.
that. Like, everyone's kind of, like, tuned to do this. It's just that you were told at a certain point that, oh, copying's bad, or you should come up with your own things, or you shouldn't copy other people's drawings and stuff like that. And so I do think a lot of the book is, you know, kids, 4-year olds have this kind of internal authority that they lose, kind of like, I think they lose it at a certain point. The people who don't lose it stay artists. But there's this kind of, like, internal authority that 4-year olds have that I think is just all adults could really, like, learn and to get addicted to, which is, I have the permission to notice what I notice, and I have the permission to do things just as much as the person next to me, or the person on stage, or the person who I'm looking at in a magazine. Like,
Right.
and I just think that, like, kids, like, they see someone doing something and, like, well, I could do that. You know what I mean? Like, there's a great line in the book by this painter named Sam Messer, and he says, like, people come up to me and say, well, my kid could do that, and he turns around and says, yeah, but you couldn't. you know because kids have that authority, they have that confidence because they haven't had it, like, beaten out of them yet,
Yeah.
and so I think that's something that we want to, with all our students and in ourselves, is we want to capture this kind of inner authority, this kind of inner, like, this inner sense that we can do this too, that we're
Yeah.
just, that we're not better than anybody else, but we're just as good as anyone else, and that if there's something we want to do, we can do it. One of my favorite books about writing is called Several Short Sentences on Writing, by the guy's name is Verlin Klinkenborg. It's his
Okay.
name. And one of the things he says in that book is, and he teaches writing, who will give you the authority to know that what you notice is worth noticing and worth putting in your
Mm.
work or whatever. He says,
Yeah.
it has to be you. You have to be the one giving you authority. But I think some of us I think that's what a good classroom does. I think that's what a good teacher does. I think that's what a good book does, is it gives you the authority. It gives you the permission. Hey, you can do this too. That's why I always loved Ed Emberley's books, because Ed Emberley's books are such invitations for kids to make stuff, to make their own world. And I thought a lot about Ed Emberley when I was making this book, because I learned so much from him. And the spirit of his books is like, you can do this too. And it's not a touchy-feely thing either. It's not just a cutesy kid thing. Like, this is what punk rock is about too. Is like, we're
Right.
up on stage, we suck. Why don't you get up on stage and suck too? That's kind of the thing about punk rock, is like, we don't need to be good. We just need to have something to say. And
Right.
my kids were punks. Like, my kids had that punk spirit right out of the gates. And it was
Hmm.
so infectious. And it made me, I just wanted that for myself. I wanted to steal it from him.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that actually kind of segues into the next thing I wanted to talk about because, I think we can learn so much, we can draw so much from kids and, the way they do things. And you have a chapter in the book toward the end of the book about being a curious elder.
Yeah.
And that really spoke to me as a teacher because, as I was teaching high school kids, a lot of times our interests were aligned. But as I got older, I noticed that, we're
Yeah.
definitely separating. And the things the kids like are not things I understand. They're not things made for me. But you talk about how we need to kind of retain that curiosity when we're working with kids, when we're, seeing what inspires them and trying to keep in touch with that. And that can really help our own creative approach too. And so that really spoke to me as an older teacher and as a parent of teenagers. But can you just expand on that a little bit and talk about the importance of keeping that curiosity as we get older?
Yeah, I mean, it was something I had to develop for myself as a parent because my kids would just be into stuff that I just like did not understand. So like
Right.
for example, my kids would love watching, every parent just rolls their eyes at this. My kids would love watching other kids play Minecraft on YouTube.
Yes.
And I just was like, why would you sit here and watch another kid play, Minecraft? But so one day I like literally made myself, and it's like, I'm not gonna sit down here and watch this with you. This is a waste of my life, whatever.
Yeah.
But one day I was like, you know what? I want to know what it is. Okay. Like, let me sit down and watch. And I was watching and I was sitting on the couch with my kids. And I'm like watching this video, this dude, and it's always some goofball who's like got a narration, and
Yep.
you're watching it, and you're like, okay, we're watching someone else play a game, and there's some goofball that's narrating and chit chatting the whole time. We're sitting here on the couch with snacks, and I just like suddenly was transported back in time to sitting on the couch with my uncles watching football. And I
Okay.
realized suddenly this is nothing different than sitting down and watching sports.
Okay.
This is
Yeah.
like for my kids. I was like, this is, but there's an essential difference. If you watch Peyton Manning or whoever throw a touchdown, it's not like you could go right out in your backyard and throw a touchdown. But if you
Right.
watch someone build something in Minecraft, you can go right away from the screen and you can go and you can sit
Mhm.
down and play Minecraft and do something with it.
Yeah.
And so I like had this moment, I'm like glitching out, and it was, and the only way I came to that though, because you can't ask kids directly why they love something, because a lot of times kids don't know. They
Right.
don't know why they like something. And that was another, I mean, that's a whole other topic that we can get back to, like when we take kids to a museum, you know, they have to be able to tell us why they like something. It's not enough to take them to a museum and like just say, "Hey, pick a piece that you like."
Yeah.
Then you have to write an essay about it. Well, you have to tell us in words what, even though so much of art is nonverbal, it's like, I don't
Right.
know, I just like this thing. So, but to get back to the curious elder thing, it was like, then, me interacting with them for that. Now, did I sit down and watch Minecraft videos all the time? No, but I started thinking about short form video content. I started thinking about YouTube, and I thought, geez, I'll bet there's people that would watch me make a print,
Right.
or draw a snail or something, or whatever
Yeah.
it is. So just hanging out with my kids and watching Minecraft videos, suddenly I felt like I had like something that I could actually use for my own work. And it was literally just because I forced myself to be curious. And I think that's the thing, is like some of us are more naturally curious than others. But I think that curiosity is something that you can fake long enough until you make it. Like you fake it till you
Mhm.
make it. Like you
Yeah.
can choose to be curious about things, even if you're not, you know? So it's like, so with kids, I think the big thing about being a curious elder for me is you just assume that the kids are all right. Like the kids are all
Yeah.
right is not an observation. It's not a Who song. It is literally you choose to believe that. And
Yeah.
then you go forward from that and you assume that there's something to what they were doing. Now, I love the 6-7 phenomenon. This feels like old like news now, but like
Right, right.
6-7, I was like right in the middle of it. And I loved how Dadaist 6-7 was. You know,
That is one way to look at it.
as an art person, I'm thinking this is Dada. This is
Yeah,
nonsensical. And this is kids having a little bit of like, they like have this weird power, suddenly because they have this thing that adults don't understand. And they have this like internal language now
yeah.
that they own that these people that are in authority positions over there don't have. And I found that like really fun. And I think that like with teenagers, this, but like teenagers are really interesting because they hate you, but they need you all the time,
Right.
right? Like, so this is a very interesting tension in life. I
Yeah,
hate you, but I need you to like to be there all the
yeah,
time. But I also think that teenagers are so great because they destroy you completely in the sense that they pierce right through every armor that you've built up to be an adult in the world and to move comfortably and get
yes.
through life. They see right through it and they pierce right through it, and they can see you for what you are, which is just a fool trying to get along in life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
and so I think that is why people are so threatened by teenagers. But if you can also use that as a great reminder, and I think that midlife for me and being around my teenagers has reminded me, hey, what did you want when you were a teenager? What were you like before all this happened to you
Right.
and all this stuff that you built and stuff? And that's why I think 4-year olds are fun too, because they really put you back in touch of like, what was it like when you were a kid? I mean, like one of my favorite questions is from Carl Jung, and he said, what did you do as a child that made the hours pass like minutes?
Mm,
And that's one of the key questions of this book that I really want readers to think about. Like, what did you do as a kid that just made time fly by? Like, time wasn't even around. What do you do now that's like that?
yeah.
How can you do that more in your life?
Mhm. Okay, so that idea, that thought actually leads me to my last question for you. Is just advice for people, for teachers here. We're going into the summer and we might actually have time and space and materials to create. And
Yeah.
so, what is your advice for people who have maybe lost touch with that creativity or just looking for more time to create or to make art? Like, where should they get started? What kind of things do you think they should do over the summer when we have a little bit more time?
I think you should do something that seems completely unrelated to what you do all year. So, like,
Okay.
I think the furthest away from school you can get is good because that'll fill you back up. So, I think if you have a hobby, I wouldn't get too. The other thing that I think is really important, especially for like art teachers or people that teach creative stuff, you don't have to practice art necessarily. Like I find that riding my bike is just as like juicing. Like it gives me just as much energy as like being in the
Okay.
studio for hours on end. So
Yeah.
one thing I would say, if there's a hobby that you haven't had time to play with and do, use the summer for that and for relaxation and that kind of thing. Exercise, because I think all of this stuff can heal us just as much as like doing creative work. But I also think if you the problem with teaching is you don't have a lot of time to do your own stuff. And so I personally am a person who thinks that long blocks of time aren't as helpful as little repeated chunks of time. So I'm
Mhm.
just a person who believes in frequency a little more than like mass volume. So like I think if you can just give yourself 15 minutes a day to make your little play place, go there for 15 minutes a day and just like see what happens. I have a feeling that if you can create that kind of creative habit, as Twyla Tharp calls it, over the summer, you could bring that into your school year. Because if you can
Mhm.
find 15 minutes a day during the summer, you could probably squirrel away 15 minutes, during the school year. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but 15 minutes over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the course of the year, and you might have to work in miniature, you might have
Mhm.
to change your idea of what your output is. But I think that frequency and daily habit is just so much more powerful, at least in my life, than having 3 weeks to paint or whatever it is. So yeah, I that's playtime. Like
Yeah.
summer should be playtime. It should be a kind of unschooling, right? What are the things you can't get away? And this is the other big thing I learned from my kids. Kids are the most creative when they're supposed to be doing something else, right? Like
Yes.
that's when
Yep.
kids are the most creative. I also
Yep.
think that's when adults are the most creative too.
Okay.
Because I'll tell you, there is nothing like having to write. Things get done around here. Like, I mean, when I have to write something, if you want something done, hire a writer who has to write because they will get it done for you, But like just today, like this morning before we talked, I was like, I have so many things to do. I have all these interviews, I have all these emails to answer. I'm going to shove all that aside for 30 minutes. And I literally made a stamp. Like I
Yeah.
just sat there and made a dumb stamp and just like with my hands. And that allowed me to show up
I was gonna
then
say you
later.
felt better after doing that,
I
huh?
felt better after doing that. And now we've had this nice conversation. And so it's like, you got to have playtime because the opposite, Stuart Brown has this great line, the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression.
Mm,
Have to find time to play and to get in touch with that like playful spirit in everyday life. And
yeah.
summer's the best time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely it is. All right, Austin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Loved every minute of the conversation. Before you go, can you tell everybody the best place to find your book?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to go to austinkleon.com, just my name.com, and you'll find links to everything there. You'll find links to my books. Some of you might really like my free Friday
I was gonna
newsletter.
say, got to sign up for the newsletter
Yeah,
too.
I put that out every Friday. I share a list of 10 things that I think are worth sharing. There's like hundreds of thousands of people read that thing, and we have a lot of fun with it. So I would love it if you would join us. And the book can be found wherever you'd like to buy books. Don't call it art.
All right, sounds good, Austin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. This was really fun. And it's good to see you again.
You too. Thanks. Thank you so much to Austin for coming on. And I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. And I hope it gave you some things to think about, whether that's carving out 15 minutes a day to make something, or embracing quantity over perfection, or maybe just sitting down with your students, talking to them, and letting their enthusiasm rub off on you. You know, there are so many ways for us to reconnect with the creative energy that we need, the creative energy that honestly brought most of us to art teaching in the first place. Again, Austin's new book is called Don't Call It Art. It is available wherever you buy books. I also recommend checking out the free Friday newsletter over at austinkleon.com. Well worth seeing that every week. There's a lot there to dive into. We will put everything in the show notes for you to find. There are also some great links from the Art of Education about creative play for art teachers and being an artist yourself, and summer books to help fuel your creative process. And we even have an article called 4 Ways to Steal Like an Art Teacher. There's a lot there to dive into if you're inspired by those ideas. So check out those articles, check out Austin's newsletter, and especially check out his new book. And hopefully you'll be able to find the inspiration you need to keep creating this summer. We're so glad you joined us for today's episode, and we hope it was helpful for you. If you know someone else who might be helped with the information in this show, we would love for you to share it with them. We also appreciate all the ratings and reviews that listeners leave for us, so if you have a few seconds to give us a 5-star rating or even leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen, we would love to see it. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next week.